Ladies and gentlemen, if the words Rumford, Tristful, or Prithee actually mean something to you, then you're probably in the wrong place. If you enjoy the thought of watching a soliloquy being performed endlessly on stage, or you enjoy a story where just about everybody dies a gruesome death, or your heart stops beating at the words the immortal bard, please leave the room right now. Nobody? Well, of course not, because we're all normal people who use normal language to communicate. I'd like to warmly welcome you all to the SOS Society, or in plain English, the Sod of Shakespeare Society. I'd like to let you know that I understand your frustration, your irritation, your confusion, bewilderment, bafflement, perplexity, incomprehension, all perfectly good synonyms that we can understand when someone waves a book in the air and says, "Today we begin Shakespeare." You all know that feeling when it happens in class. The accompanying groans that sound like there's a zombie apocalypse in the room. The sudden urge to turn up that terrible One Direction song on your friend's iPod just at the hope of escaping the bard. Anything is better than Shakespeare. But ladies and gentlemen, let's be painfully honest. Shakespeare gets all this credit for writing comedies and tragedies. But if a comedy actually isn't funny, how is it a comedy? And if after the main character dies, there is no end to trouble or suffering, how is it actually tragic? Quite frankly, it makes no sense to me. But then again, how much of Shakespeare's work makes sense to anybody? Let's take a look at a couple of his most famous plays. Now, you'll have to excuse me if I only know one or two quotes from each play. Generally, the rest just becomes a blur. But naturally, Shakespeare wouldn't use the word blur, would he? He'd use the word obfuscation or discombobulation, or make some metaphorical reference to weeds growing in the garden, or an allusion to an obscure Greek myth. Probably explains why most of his work is a blur. But where was I? Oh yes, some of his most famous plays. Now, first I'd like to visit someone who happens to have teenage depression, but for more than 20 years. Good old Hamlet. Now, most teenagers, if they sulk for more than a couple of days, they are bound to get into trouble. Hamlet, he seems to make a career out of it. And instead of his mother attending better parenting classes, she practically lusts after anybody with the title of king, while slowly watching her son go mad. Some mother. But then again, what's Hamlet doing all this time? Well, ladies and gentlemen, depression is hardly the word for it. To be or not to be, that is the question. I have a question as well. What does Hamlet's question actually mean? Well, thanks to my invaluable Shakespearean language translator of No Fear Shakespeare, it means should I live or should I die? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is that simple. But could Shakespeare leave it at that? Of course not. He has to go further and add, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the stings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. Thankfully, No Fear Shakespeare came to the rescue once again. And surprise, surprise, that means should I live or should I die as well? Ladies and gentlemen, it seems that procrastination was not Hamlet's only fatal flaw. Repeating himself added to the problem. Hamlet had 20 years to think up of a solution to his issues, and the best that Shakespeare could come up with was, let's write another play. You'd think he'd have enough of plays by now. If only CSI had existed back then, all of Hamlet's problems would have been solved in about an hour, including ads. So, okay, not all of Shakespeare's plays are quite so miserable. Some of them start out with a bit of happiness before they meet their inevitable disastrous ending. Let's take the tragic love story of Romeo and Juliet, a tale of forbidden love that defies all odds. Well, at least for a while. People say that what makes the story so timeless is that it shows that love can overcome all obstacles. Well, evidently they did not see the obstacle of death coming in their way. Ladies and gentlemen, they kind of failed at that one. And people say that Shakespeare's plays teach us valuable life lessons. Like what? That getting married to a 13-year-old girl is okay? I don't think so. And people, the only thing I've learned from Romeo and Juliet is that Leonardo DiCaprio looks pretty good in a suit of armour, and that if I was to ever separate from the one I truly love, I'd make sure I'd exchange my phone numbers before I resort to poisoning myself. Ladies and gentlemen, parting may be such sweet sorrow, but I think we can all agree here that parting with Shakespeare is nothing but sweet relief. And as for the comedies, they fall into the same category as The Bold and the Beautiful. Let us take the play Much Ado About Nothing, for example. It's all in the title, a story about nothing. Somebody falls in love with somebody else, but then the hero is convinced that his love interest is cheating on him, but really it's somebody evil plotting against them both for no particular reason. So then the plot is uncovered by a couple of mentally challenged characters who make the worst blondes in the world seem like rocket scientists. And then the lovely couple make up, but only after she pretends that she's dead and the guy thinks that he's marrying somebody else. So after that, I was much like the main character Benedict, who declared that drinking was better than falling in love with anybody, and it is certainly better than reading Shakespeare. I know that there are people out there who worship his every word, and they're mostly out-of-work actors with a need to hold a skull saying the words, "Alas, poor Yorick," or desperate English teachers attempting to fail their English students. Let our own immortal cries resonate through the ages, and sod off Shakespeare.